I knew something was wrong the moment she laughed at his jokes before he finished telling them. That's the thing nobody warns you about. It's not the big red flags that get you. It's the small ones. The ones you dismiss because you don't want to be the difficult mother-in-law. The ones you explain away because your son looks happier than he has in years. And what kind of mother takes that from her child? My name is Opal Merritt. I am 64 years old. I taught 4th grade for 31 years at Clover Hill Elementary in Knoxville, Tennessee. I raised my son Sawyer alone after his father walked out when Sawyer was 9. I built this life with substitute teaching, summer school stipends, and inheritance from my mother that I never once touched because I wanted it to mean something when the time came. When I finally retired, I had the house on Briar Ridge Road paid in full. I had the savings account, the small investment portfolio my financial advisor helped me build over 2 decades. I had Sawyer, who called every Sunday without fail and still brought me tomatoes from his garden every August. I thought I had done everything right. Her name was Tatum Reyes. She came into Sawyer's life at a farmer's market on a Saturday in March. He texted me a photo of her that same afternoon, her laughing, holding a bunch of sunflowers, his hand just visible at the edge of the frame. "Mom, I think I met someone," he wrote. I remember smiling at my phone like a fool. She was 38. Sawyer was 42. She was a freelance graphic designer, she said, working remotely. She had a dog named after a Springsteen album and strong opinions about sourdough. She was warm the first time I met her. Warm in the way that makes you feel chosen. She held both my hands when she said hello, looked me right in the eyes and said, "Sawyer talks about you constantly. I feel like I already know you." I was charmed. God help me. I was completely charmed. The first question came 6 weeks in. We were sitting on my back porch, the 3 of us after dinner. Sawyer had gone inside to get more sweet tea, and Tatum leaned back in her chair and looked out at the yard with this expression of studied contentment. Then she said, "This property goes pretty far back, doesn't it? All the way to that tree line?" I told her yes, about 2 acres total. She nodded slowly, like she was calculating something. "It's beautiful. Do you own all of it outright?" I said yes. She smiled and dropped it. I told myself she was just making conversation. People ask about houses. It's a normal thing to say when you're sitting on someone's back porch admiring their yard. I poured myself more tea and forgot about it by morning. The second time was at Sawyer's apartment, about a month later. We were looking at old photos on his laptop, his childhood, his grandfather's farm, and she asked out of nowhere whether my mother's estate had been settled cleanly or whether there were any other family members who might have a claim on anything. She framed it as concern. "I just want to make sure Sawyer isn't walking into complications," she said, touching his arm. Sawyer laughed it off. "Tatum worries," he said, the way you'd say it fondly. I didn't laugh. I changed the subject. The third time was at Thanksgiving. She helped me clear the table after dinner, and while we were alone in the kitchen, she asked whether I had a financial advisor I trusted, because she knew a man who had helped several of her clients restructure their assets before retirement to protect against probate complications. She said it was just something to think about. She said she hated watching families fight over things that could have been handled simply. I told her I was satisfied with my current arrangements. She said, "Of course," and smiled and carried the leftover sweet potatoes to the refrigerator. That night, after they left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. I had taught 4th graders for 3 decades. I knew the difference between a child who wanted something and a child who was working towards something. I had seen manipulative behavior in every form it takes. The slow campaign, the soft ask, the planted doubt. I knew what patient want looked like, and I recognized it now, sitting across my kitchen table from a feeling I hadn't named yet. I called my friend Odessa the next morning. Odessa worked 40 years as a paralegal before she retired. She is the sharpest woman I have ever known, and she has absolutely no patience for nonsense. I told her everything, all 3 conversations, word for word. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Opal, I want you to go look at your deed. Right now. Take it out and hold it in your hand." I did. Good, she said. Now I want you to call your financial advisor today and tell him not to speak to anyone about your accounts without written authorization from you. Anyone. I asked her if she was being dramatic. She said, I sincerely hope so. I made the call. My advisor, a man named Dale who had handled my finances since 2003, said he would note it in my file immediately. He sounded unsurprised in a way that made me feel cold. I didn't say anything to Sawyer. Not yet. I didn't have anything concrete, only a feeling, and I knew how it would sound. I knew he was in love. I knew he would hear it as jealousy, as possessiveness, as me struggling to share him. I had read enough about mothers-in-law to know exactly how my concerns would be received, and so I waited and I watched, and I kept my documents in a fireproof lockbox that I moved to Odessa's hall closet. By February, Sawyer told me he was going to propose. I hugged him. I told him I was happy for him. I cried in the car on the way home, and I didn't let myself examine why. They got engaged on Valentine's Day. She posted photos immediately. The ring, the restaurant, Sawyer's face. 347 people liked the picture. Someone commented future Mrs. Me. Merritt and Tatum replied with a heart. The wedding was set for the following October. And then, in April, things shifted. It started with her asking Sawyer whether I would be willing to sit down with a financial planner together, all three of us, just as a family, to discuss long-term planning, estate coordination, that sort of thing. She presented it as a gift, something she wanted to do for us. She found the name of a firm on the east side of town that specialized in multi-generational wealth transfer. Sawyer mentioned it to me on the phone tentatively, like he wasn't sure how I would respond. He said, I told her I'd ask. No pressure. I said I would think about it. Then I called Odessa. Odessa ran the name of the firm through some contacts she still had. The firm was legitimate, she said, but the man Tatum had specifically recommended, a junior associate named Felix Graves, had been flagged in a civil complaint 3 years earlier involving an elderly widow in Chatsworth, whose assets had been quietly rerouted into a joint account she hadn't fully understood she was signing. The complaint had been settled out of court. Felix Graves still had his license. I wrote that down. I still didn't go to Sawyer. I know how that sounds. I know people will ask later why I waited so long. What I can tell you is this. I have watched mothers go to their sons with suspicions, and I have watched those sons choose their partners, and I have watched those mothers spend years eating holiday dinners in silence. I was not willing to fire a shot until I had ammunition that could not be dismissed. Love is not rational. You cannot argue someone out of it with vague unease. You have to show them something they cannot explain away. So instead, I started writing things down. Every question Tatum had asked me about money, property, accounts. Every time she had suggested a change, a simplification, a consolidation. Every name she had dropped. I kept the list in a notebook I stored at Odessa's house, and I started paying attention differently. In May, I noticed that Sawyer seemed tired in a way he hadn't been before, not physically tired. Tired in the way of a person who is managing something, suppressing something. When I asked him how he was, there was a half-second delay before he answered. I recognized that delay. I hissed, in the faces of 9-year-olds who were keeping a secret they didn't want to keep. I started calling him more often, just to talk. Nothing important. Just to stay close. In late June, Tatum stopped coming to Sunday dinners. First once, then twice. Sawyer came alone and offered different explanations. She had a deadline, she wasn't feeling well, she had a call with a client overseas. I didn't push. One Sunday in July, he sat on my back porch and didn't say anything for a long time. I brought out sweet tea and sat beside him and waited, the way I had learned to wait when he was a boy with something difficult to say. He finally said, "She wants us to buy a house together before the wedding. Put both our names on everything right away. She says it shows commitment." I asked what he thought. He was quiet again. Then he said, "I don't know." That was the most important thing he had said to me in months. Not the content. The "I don't know." Because Sawyer, when he was certain about something, said so. He did not have his father's habit of convenient ambiguity. When he said he didn't know, he meant something was wrong and he hadn't let himself say it out loud yet. I didn't push that night either. I just said, "You don't have to decide anything right now." He nodded. He came back the following Sunday and the one after that, and we didn't talk about it directly, but I watched his face each time and I saw a man slowly surfacing from something. I also, in that same period, hired someone. I am aware of how that sounds. I am a retired schoolteacher from Knoxville. I had never in my life hired a private investigator, but Odessa gave me a name. A woman named Bet, a former sheriff's deputy who worked a small firm on the north side, and I made an appointment on a Tuesday and I sat in a beige office and I told Bet everything. I told her about the questions, the financial planner, Felix Graves, the wedding timeline, the joint property suggestion. Bet listened without a single change of expression. When I finished, she said, "How much of your net worth does she know about?" I thought back through every conversation. Every question Tatum had asked, the way she had nodded while I answered. I said, "Probably most of it." Bet nodded. "Give me 3 weeks." What Bet found, I did not fully expect, even though by then I should not have been surprised by anything. Tatum Reyes had been married before. Not once, twice. The first marriage in Phoenix had ended in divorce in 2013. Unremarkable. The second marriage in a suburb of Charlotte had ended when her husband, a retired contractor named Gerald, who was 30 years her senior, died of a heart attack in 2019. She had been named in his estate. The estate had later been contested by his adult children, who claimed Gerald had changed his will in the final year of his life under circumstances they described in court documents as coercive. The case had been dismissed on procedural grounds. Gerald's daughter had given a statement to the court. She had described a pattern that sounded, word for word, like the last 14 months of my life. I sat in Bet's office and I read that document twice. Then I went home and I sat in my kitchen, in the same chair I had sat in after Thanksgiving, and I allowed myself to feel every single thing I had kept carefully contained since March of the year before. The fear, the anger, the grief that was still, somehow, also grief for my son's happiness, which I was about to destroy in order to save him. I cried for about 20 minutes. Then I washed my face and called Odessa. Now I had to decide what to do. I thought about going to Sawyer directly, sitting him down, laying out everything. I thought about it for almost 2 weeks, and I kept coming back to the same problem. He was 2 months from a wedding he had been planning for a year. He had told his friends. He had bought a suit. He had written vows. He'd mentioned this once, shyly, and I had found it unbearably tender. If I came to him with a folder of documents and a private investigator's report, I might save him, or I might lose him. In his worst moments of doubt, and I believed he was having them, he might be more committed to the version of Tatum he wanted to believe in than the one in front of him. I needed him to see it himself. So I called him on a Thursday evening and I said, very casually, that I had been doing some thinking about the future and I would like to go over my estate documents with him, just so he understood what existed. Just as a formality. I said I wanted to include Odessa since she had helped me organize things over the years. He said yes, no hesitation. We met on a Sunday, the 3 of us, at Odessa's kitchen table, which felt safer than mine. I had everything laid out. Odessa had helped me prepare. And what I showed Sawyer that afternoon wasn't what Tatum thought I had. It wasn't what she'd been building toward. Over the past 8 months, with Odessa's help, I had quietly transferred the core assets, the portfolio, the savings, into a trust structured in a way that made it essentially unreachable to any future spouse without explicit witnessed amendment. My house remained in my name alone. There was nothing to consolidate, nothing to reroute, nothing to sign. He didn't fully understand the implications immediately. He looked at the documents with a polite, attentive expression, asking occasional questions. And then Odessa, in her careful, flat paralegal voice, explained what the previous structure had looked like and what this new structure prevented. Sawyer was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Why did you do this?" I didn't answer right away. I slid Bet's report across the table, then the court documents from Charlotte. I watched his face while he read. I have thought about that afternoon many times since. I cannot fully describe what I saw happen to him in that kitchen. It was not a single expression. It was a sequence: confusion, resistance, the specific pain of someone who wants to disbelieve something badly enough to find a reason, and then the slow, terrible arrival of recognition. He knew. I could see him knowing. And I could see, underneath the knowing, that some part of him had been waiting to know, had been sitting on that back porch on those quiet Sunday evenings, circling exactly this, unable to name it. He put the papers down. He said, "She asked me last week if I would add her name to the house. Before the ceremony. She said it was symbolic." I said I knew. He didn't say anything else for a long time. Then he got up and walked out to Odessa's backyard and stood there with his back to us for a while. Odessa poured more coffee. Neither of us spoke. When he came back in, his eyes were red. He sat back down. He said, "I need to make some calls." He called her that night. I don't know exactly what was said. He's never told me in detail, and I haven't asked. What I know is that it ended. What I know is that Tatum, faced with specific questions she hadn't been asked before, gave answers that didn't hold. What I know is that Sawyer came to my house 2 days later and sat at my kitchen table and ate leftover soup and didn't say much. And I sat with him and didn't say much either, and that was the right thing. He canceled the wedding quietly. Told friends there had been a mutual decision to separate. Didn't explain further. Tatum left Knoxville within 3 weeks. That was 14 months ago. Sawyer still comes for Sunday dinner. He still brings me tomatoes in August. He started seeing a therapist in January, which I consider one of the better outcomes of the whole ordeal. And last spring, he joined a hiking group and has mentioned a woman named Rosalind in 3 separate conversations without realizing he was doing it. I kept the lockbox at Odessa's for a while, then brought it home. The trust is still in place. The house is still in my name. I am not a suspicious person by nature. I am not someone who looks for the worst in people. I spent 31 years believing in small humans who hadn't given me much reason to yet, and most of them grew up fine. What I learned from all of this is not that kindness is weakness or that warmth should be treated as a threat. What I learned is that patience has 2 faces, the patience of a person who loves you and is waiting for you to be ready, and the patience of a person who wants something and is waiting for the right moment. I had taught long enough to know the difference. I just had to trust that I still did. I've had a long time to sit with all of it now. Not just what happened, but why it happened the way it did. Why it unfolded slowly. Why I waited. Why things landed the way they did in the end. And what I keep coming back to is something I never expected to learn from my own life. That the choices we make quietly, over months, without any audience, are the ones that actually define us. Tatum was patient. I'll give her that. She was patient, and she was careful, and she was very, very good at making herself appear to be something generous. And for a while, it worked. Not because I was foolish. I don't think I was foolish. But because I wanted Sawyer to be happy, and wanting something badly enough can make you slow to see what's sitting right in front of you. That's not weakness. That's just love, doing what love always does, which is make you a little blind in the places you most need to see clearly. What saved us wasn't luck. It was the slow accumulation of small decisions made without drama. Calling Dale, moving the documents to Odessa's hall closet, writing things down in a notebook nobody else would ever read. None of those moments felt significant at the time. They felt like precautions. Like the reasonable behavior of a woman who had spent 31 years learning to notice things other people walked past. I think about the students I used to teach, the ones who were struggling, who were being pulled in directions that weren't good for them. And the thing I learned with children is that you cannot force understanding. You can only create the conditions in which understanding becomes possible. You arrange things, you wait, you stay present, and then, when the moment comes, you hand them the information and you trust them to do something real with it. That's what I did with Sawyer, and it required something that doesn't come easily to most people, which is the willingness to let the person you love arrive at the truth in their own time, at their own pace, even when you can already see the whole picture and it frightens you. There is a kind of discipline in that, a restraint that takes more strength than confrontation does. What happened to Tatum, the exposure, the unraveling, the departure, was not something I orchestrated for revenge. It was simply the result of what she had done meeting the reality of what she had not bothered to understand, that I was paying attention. The behind the quiet of my kitchen and the sweetness of Sunday dinners, there was a woman who had raised a child alone, managed her own finances for 3 decades, and taught enough human beings to recognize the difference between someone who wanted to know you and someone who wanted to know what you had. Those are not the same thing. They never were. Sawyer is okay. More than okay, actually. There is a kind of person who comes through something like this cleaner than they went in, not unscathed, but sharper, more honest with themselves, more willing to ask hard questions before they trust. He is becoming that person. I can see it on Sundays when he sits on my porch and actually says what he thinks instead of managing what he shows me. I will take that over a wedding any day.